In the cold, gray skies over Western Europe, a legend was forged not from grace, but from sheer, brutal force. A plane once mocked, dismissed as too big, too clumsy for a fighter pilot's war. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. German pilots, confident in their agile Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs, initially laughed at the heavy American Jug. But that laughter would soon die in their throats, replaced by the deafening roar of 8.50 caliber machine guns and the earth-shattering impact of a truly unexpected weapon. This is the story of a single desperate mission. A mission where 12 of these unlikely giants found themselves staring down the elite of the Luftwaffe. Outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and with their primary task a failure, they faced annihilation. Until one pilot, backed into a corner, made a decision that would rewrite the rulebook. A decision involving a 2,000-pound bomb load that would end the laughing for good.
Our story takes us to the morning of April 8, 1944. The location, the skies north of Bremen, Germany. The unit, the 62nd Fighter Squadron of the 56th Fighter Group, the Wolfpack, based at RAF Boxted, England.
The 56th was unique. While other groups transitioned to the sleeker P-51 Mustang, the Wolfpack, under the fiery leadership of Colonel Hubert Hub Zimpke, remained steadfast believers in the Thunderbolt's potential. They were masters of the high-altitude boom and zoom, using the P-47's incredible dive speed and rugged construction as their weapons.
The target on this day was a critical one. The Henkel Aircraft Factory in Wismar, a facility pumping out bombers for the Reich. The mission, a maximum-effort bomber escort. But this was no ordinary escort. Intelligence suggested the Luftwaffe was concentrating its forces, its Experten, its aces with hundreds of kills in the area to defend vital industrial sites. The men of the 62nd Squadron, led by Captain Walter Bud Mahurin, a seasoned ace with over a dozen victories, knew the odds. They were to shepherd a box of B-17 flying fortresses deep into hostile territory, a journey where the Luftwaffe would have every advantage of position and numbers. The P-47, with its limited range, would be stretching its legs to the absolute limit. They would be on the razor's edge of their fuel, with no margin for error, and certainly no margin for a prolonged dogfight against the best Germany had to offer. At 1,000 hours, the Thunderbolts of the 62nd, 12 aircraft in all, rendezvoused with the lumbering B-17s over the North Sea. Each P-47 was laden for a fight. 850 caliber Groundings, loaded with over 400 rounds per gun, and, unusually, each carried a pair of 1,000-pound bombs on underwing pylons. This was a new tactic, fighter-bomber operations, designed to give the Jugs a secondary ground attack role once the bombers turned for home. The weight was immense, over 2 tons of external ordnance. It made the already heavy Thunderbolt feel like a flying truck, sluggish on the controls, drinking fuel at an alarming rate. Crossing the enemy coast, the first signs of trouble appeared. Flak, the ugly black smudges of German anti-aircraft fire, began to dot the sky. Then the dreaded radio call from the bomber stream. Bandits, 11 o'clock high. Captain Mahurin squinted into the sun. What he saw made his blood run cold. Not just a scattered group of interceptors, but a full Gruppe, over 40 German fighters, a mix of Bf-109Gs and the deadly new Focke-Wulf FW-190A8s were forming up for a textbook head-on attack against the fortresses. These were no rookies. The sleek silhouettes and aggressive positioning marked them as veterans, likely from JG-1 or JG-11, units packed with pilots who had learned their trade on the Eastern Front and now defended the fatherland itself.
By 11:45 hours, the battle was joined. Mahurin gave the order. Drop tanks, then drop bombs. Jettison everything. We're going in.
One by one, the auxiliary fuel tanks fell away. But as the pilots reached for the bomb release switches, a new problem arose. The electrical release mechanisms on several aircraft, frozen by the high-altitude cold or simply faulty, refused to function. Pilots cursed over the radio. They were now stuck, carrying their full 2,000-pound bomb load into a swirling, high-speed dogfight against superior numbers of far more nimble aircraft. It was a fighter pilot's worst nightmare, encumbered at a severe energy disadvantage and desperately low on fuel. The German pilots, seeing the cumbersome bomb-laden thunderbolts waddling into the fray, must have felt a surge of confidence. To them, the jugs looked like easy prey. The Luftwaffe strike was brutal and efficient. The German fighters split into elements, some engaging the Thunderbolts in a turning fight they knew the Americans couldn't win, while others slashed through the bomber formation. The air became a chaotic painting of tracers, smoke, and falling aircraft. 2 B-17s were immediately hit, falling out of formation with engines afire. The 12 P-47s were scattered, each pilot fighting for his life. Lieutenant Robert Johnson, another ace in the squadron, found himself in a spiraling duel with 2 109s, his heavy aircraft protesting every hard turn. He could feel the drag of the bombs, the way they stole his speed, his lifeblood after every maneuver. The laughter of the Germans wasn't audible over the roar of the engine and the gunfire, but it was palpable in their tactics, their willingness to close in on what they saw as a crippled foe. By 1200 hours, the mission was unraveling. Fuel gauges in the P-47s dipped dangerously toward the reserve levels. The bomber formation was mauled, and the 62nd Fighter Squadron was no longer a cohesive unit. It was a collection of individual battles of survival. One P-47, its pilot desperately trying to shake a Focke-Wulf, dove away, his bombs still stubbornly attached. Another took critical hits to its wing, the pilot nursing the shuddering aircraft back toward the coast, out of the fight. And then, the moment of supreme crisis. Captain Mahurin, having driven off one attacker, scanned the sky. He saw a sight that chilled in to the bone. Below him, at about 10,000 feet, a group of over 20 German fighters, 109s and 190s, were reforming. They had finished their first pass and were climbing, preparing to roll in for a second, potentially devastating attack on the bleeding bomber stream. His own flight was down to 6 aircraft, all low on fuel, all still inexplicably carrying their bombs. They were in no position to engage. The mathematics of war were clear and cruel. If that German swarm reached the B-17s again, it would be a massacre. The Heinkel factory mission was already a failure, but the total loss of this bomber box would be a catastrophe. Fear, cold and sharp, gripped Mahurin. Not fear for himself, but fear of failure. The mission, his men, the bombers, all were on the brink. The Luftwaffe's best were below, regrouping, confident. The P-47s, the planes they laughed at, were above, out of position, out of energy, and out of time. The weight of command pressed down. Every textbook tactic, every bit of fighter pilot doctrine screamed that he should disengage, save his remaining aircraft and fuel, and run for home. But to do so would be to condemn the bombers. They were trapped, not by the enemy, but by circumstance, technology, and the cruel, ticking clock of their own fuel consumption. It was in this moment of utter desperation that a wild, unorthodox, and terrifying idea flashed in Walter Mahurin's mind.
He looked at his bomb-laden wings, at the climbing Germans below, and at the fragile formation of B-17s beyond. The bombs were a death sentence in a dogfight. But what if they weren't just dead weight? What if they could become the weapon?
His voice, calm but laced with iron resolve, crackled over the squadron frequency. All Wolfpack elements, this is lead. Do not, repeat, do not try for a conventional release. We're going in with them still on. Follow me down. We're going to skip bomb the bastards.
The order was insane. Skip bombing was a low-level attack technique used against ships and ground targets, where a bomb was released at wave-top or tree-top height, so it would literally skip into its target like a stone. No one had ever conceived of using it against a formation of enemy fighters in midair. It was a tactic of pure, unadulterated shock and awe. Maharan didn't have a fusing solution for an airburst. His plan was visceral and terrifying: to fly directly at the reforming German formation and release the bombs into the very space they occupied, creating a wall of flying steel and high explosives. Without hesitation, the remaining Thunderbolt pilots acknowledged there was no time to debate. Nosing their heavy fighters over, they entered a near-vertical dive from 18,000 feet, aiming not at individual aircraft, but at the heart of the enemy swarm. The airspeed built rapidly, the scream of the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine becoming a shriek. The bombs, still firmly attached, strained against their pylons.
The German pilots, seeing the Thunderbolts diving, likely assumed they were making a hopeless energy-building pass. They began to scatter, to turn into the attack, standard procedure against a diving foe. But this was not standard. At 2,000 feet, terrifyingly close to the scattering enemy fighters, Mahurin squeezed the bomb release. One by one, his two 1,000-pound demons fell away. Behind him, his wingmen did the same.
What happened next was not precision bombing. It was area denial of the most brutal kind. The bombs released at high speed and shallow angle tumbled and sizzled through the formation of German fighters. They didn't need a direct hit. The sheer kinetic terror of 24 1,000-pound high-explosive projectiles ripping through their carefully arranged stack was enough. Then, the explosions. The bombs impacted into fields below and detonated in massive simultaneous geysers of earth and fire. But the shockwaves and the storm of shrapnel ripped upwards into the Luftwaffe's ranks. The sky itself seemed to erupt. German fighters were thrown violently aside, their wings shredding in the concussive blasts and debris. The orderly reformation dissolved into pure, unmitigated panic. The psychological impact was absolute. One moment, the Luftwaffe's best were in control, preparing the killing blow. The next, they were fleeing through a man-made hurricane of steel and flame, thrown about by the thunder of their own ground. The laughter was finally, definitively silenced. The result was immediate and decisive. The planned second German attack on the bombers never materialized. The surviving B-17s, though battered, were able to turn for home without further major interception. The P-47s of the 62nd, now free of their bomb load and having achieved total tactical surprise, used the chaos to disengage. They streaked for the channel, their fuel gauges hovering on empty. Every single Thunderbolt that had participated in that desperate dive made it back to Bogstad, though many landed with their tanks reading dry. Post-mission assessment, based on gun camera footage and bomber crew reports, confirmed the stunning effect. While only 2 German fighters were confirmed as directly destroyed by the skip-bombing attack, over a dozen others were seen taking evasive action so violent it took them out of the fight, with several likely suffering critical damage.
More importantly, the entire German counter-air operation was disrupted. An estimated 20 to 30 enemy fighters were rendered ineffective at a critical moment. The cost was the failure to destroy the primary target, the Wismar factory, but the salvation of the bomber force was deemed a higher strategic victory.
For his inspired, against-all-odds leadership and the sheer audacity of his tactic, Captain Walter Bud Mahurin was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second-highest award for valor. His decision on April 8, 1944, became legendary within the 8th Air Force.
It proved the Thunderbolt's incredible versatility and the boundless ingenuity of its pilots under pressure. The mission served as the ultimate rebuttal to the Luftwaffe's pro-derision. The P-47 was not just a fighter. It was a flying artillery platform, a tank buster, a bomber escort, and, as demonstrated that day over Bremen, a weapon of psychological warfare capable of turning the very sky into a weapon. It ended the laughing and cemented the Jug's fearsome reputation as the heavyweight champion of the European skies. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War, a story of a machine underestimated, of pilots pushed to the brink, and of a decision that turned certain defeat into a legendary, if unorthodox, victory. Subscribe to the War Archives as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.